Today we will discuss about the regional rural bank. The major objective of regional rural banks are provision of credit in the rural and semi-urban area. In this section, the history, functions, objectives of regional rural banks are explained. Regional rural banks were established on the recommendation of Narasimha Committee on Rural Credit, and according to the Narasimha Committee, the RRBs would be of much better suited than the commercial banks or cooperative banks in meeting the needs of the financial needs of the rural area. And after considering the recommendation of the committee, the Government of India passed Regional Rural Bank Act 1976. The regional rural banks were set up under the provision of the 26 September 1975 Ordinance and the RRB Act of 1976 to allocate banking and credit services for agriculture and other rural sectors. At that time, almost 70% of India's population was in the rural area, and in majority of the places there were the lack of proper banking facilities also. After the legislation of Regional Rural Bank Act 1976, the first regional rural bank, Prathama Gramin Bank, was established on October 2nd, 1975, which was sponsored by the Syndicate Bank with a initial capital of rupees 5. It was started with an initial share capital of rupees 5 crores. Four other more RRBs were also established on the same day, and one important bank that was established in the eastern region was the Gaur Gramin Bank, and it is the first Gramin Bank at the eastern India. The major functions of regional rural banks are given in this section. The major functions are the first one, the RRBs grant loans and advances to small farmers, agricultural laborers, so that they can start their own farming activities, including purchase of land, seeds, manures, etc. Second one, the banking RRB provides banking services at the doorsteps of rural people, particularly in those areas which are not served by the commercial banks. The second function is the provision of banking services at the doorsteps of the rural people. Third function is RRBs charges a lower interest, and thus they reduce the cost of credit. That is, the cost reduction by reducing the interest rate is another important function of RRB. Like agricultural finance or finance to the needy area in the rural area, RRB provides loans and other financial assistance to entrepreneurs in village, semi-urban and small towns. Next important function is that they provide loans to artisans to encourage them for the production of artistic and related goods. The another function is to encourage the saving habits among the rural and semi-urban population. These are the important functions of regional rural bank, that is provision of granting loans and advances to small farmers, agricultural laborers, provide loans and other financial assistance to entrepreneurs in village area, provides loans and other advances to the artisans in the rural area, encourage saving habits. Then another one, they usually charges a lower rate of interest, and they helps to earn. This lower rate of interest is to reduce the cost of credit in the rural area. Thus, the major functions of the RRBs can be summarized as follows: bridging the credit gap in the rural area. Second one, developed measures which would restrict the outflow of rural deposit to urban area, or restriction of flow of rural deposit to our urban area. The next one is reduce regional imbalance and increase rural employment generation activities. These are the major functions of regional rural bank. Major objectives of RRBs are as follows: provide banking services to the rural and semi-urban area. That is the first objective. Second one, provision or provide locker, debt and credit card facilities to the countryside people. Next objective is enhance employment opportunities by promoting trade and commerce in rural area, support the entrepreneurs in rural area, provide the wage distribution for pension and MGNRHA program. These are the important objectives of regional rural banks. That is the major objectives that provide banking services to rural and semi-urban area, provision of local debit and credit card facilities in the rural and semi-urban area, enhance employment opportunities by promoting commerce and trade in the rural area, support entrepreneurs in rural area, and pension and MGNRHA wage distribution. These are some of the important objectives of regional rural bank. The ownership of regional rural banks are divided or under the are divided as follows. First one, central government with a share of 50%, state government with a share of 15%, and sponsor bank with a share of 35%. This sponsor bank can be any commercial banks, and each and every regional rural banks are sponsored by a commercial bank. That bank is known as sponsor bank. Here, the ownership of regional rural banks are shared by central government, which has a share of 50%, state government, which has a share of 15%, and sponsor bank with a share of 35%. The major differences between the commercial bank and regional rural banks are given in this section. Both the regional rural bank and commercial bank performs similar functions, whereas there exist some differences in their functioning. They are given as follows. The first one is that the main reason behind the existence of RRB is the development of rural and backward area. That is, the development of rural and backward area is the major function or major objective of the regional rural bank, whereas the commercial bank aims at profits making. A second difference is that the scope of regional rural bank is limited to agricultural finance, small scale sector, handicrafts and other small scale sector loans, etc. Whereas the scope of commercial bank is vast and wide. It includes housing loans, car finance, letter of credit, credit to big companies and many more activities. Next important function is that RRB is present in rural and semi areas only, whereas the commercial banks are spread all over the country. Major focus of RRBs are on accepting deposit and granting loans to the people, whereas the focus of the commercial banks are more, or their activities are wider than the regional rural banks. It includes stockbroking, asset management, insurance, merchant banking, venture capital finance, foreign exchange related business, etc. All these activities are done by the commercial banks, whereas the activities of regional rural banks are very restricted. Another difference is that the stakeholders of RRBs include Government of India, State Government and Commercial Bank. All these three groups have ownership right on the RRBs, whereas the commercial banks are owned by the public and by the central government. The area function of the regional rural banks are mainly in the rural and semi-urban area, and the area of operation is decided by the NABARD and by the sponsor bank. The role of sponsor bank is given in this section. As we have seen, each regional rural bank is sponsored by a public sector bank, and a bank who sponsors regional rural bank is known as sponsor bank, and it is the duty of sponsor bank to aid and assist the regional rural bank. And the sponsor bank help the RRB by subscribing to the share capital, training personnel of the regional rural bank, providing managerial and financial assistance to RRB. All these services are provided by the sponsor bank to the RRB. That is, they subscribe the share capital, they have to subscribe for 35%. They provide training to the employees. They provide managerial and financial assistance to the regional rural bank. The regional rural banks are regulated by the RBI and it is supervised by the NABARD. This about the regulation about the regional rural bank. That is, regional rural banks are regulated by the RBI and they sponsored by NABARD. In India, almost all states have RRBs except Sikkim and Goa. The organizational structure of the regional rural banks are given here. One important point to remember is that the structure of RRB differs from one RRB to the other, depending upon the size and the nature of RRB. The hierarchy of the officials in the RRB are given as follows. First one, at the top, there is Board of Director. Second, Chairman and Managing Director. Third one is General Manager. Then there will be assistant manager, regional manager or chief manager, senior manager, manager officer, office assistant and office attendant. This is the hierarchy of the regional rural bank. We can sum up the regional rural bank as follows. It was formed under the RRB Act of 1976. The objective is provide credit and related banking facilities to small farmers, agricultural laborers, artisans and the rural poor. In 2005, there were 196 RRBs in India, but the number came down to 45 as at April 1st, 2019. And the target of the government RRB, the target of the RBI is to reduce it to 38. And furthermore, in the Union Budget of 2019-20, nearly 235 rupees crores were allocated for the recapitalization of RRB. Some of the important problems faced by the RRBs are as follows. Major one, the RRBs in India are not functioning well and therefore the government has reduced the number in order to increase the efficiency. The first important problem is the lack of coordination in branch expansion. Another one is difficulties and constraints in deposit mobilization. Third one, slow progress in lending activity. Urban orientation of staff. Majority of the staff prefers to stay back in the urban area than in the rural area. This affected the functioning of RRB. In the case of providing loans and other banking services, the RRB follows the same procedures as of commercial bank, but the rural people or the villagers are of the view that it is very complicated and they prefer the traditional money lenders and indigenous bankers than the regional rural bank, even though the rate of interest is low. This is some of the important problems faced by the regional rural bank in India. And the important regional rural banks in India are given as in this table. These are the important regional rural banks that are functioning in India.